Um, okay, I should start now. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. First of all, I want to dedicate this year in memory of my cousin who passed away this past week. For Yehudis Orlean. Her maiden name was Lieberman. She's she was the daughter of Yosef and Yafa Lieberman, and a very, very fine person. If I have time at the end of this year, I will talk a little bit about her, and this year should be dedicated in her memory. Okay, this week's Sedra, this coming week's Sedra, I should say, is Parshas Terumah. And the Parshas Terumah, the Torah talks about the building of the Mishkan. And the main kli, utensil of the Mishkan, there are some questions as to whether we could refer to the Aron as the kli HaMishkan or not. Seems to be a dispute between the Rambam and the Ramban. But the main object in the Mishkan was the Aron, the ark. The ark contained in it the Aseres HaDibros, and it contained also Tzinsenes Haman, a bottle or a pitcher that had the mun in it, and the Mata Aron, or to the side of it. But the focus, what I want to speak today is about the two human figures, the two keruvim that were on top of the Aron, and in the Beis HaMikdash there were two keruvim on the sides of the Aron, and it was two almost angelic figures, youthful figures, something that was not accepted otherwise, other than there to have human figures in any Jewish, from a Jewish perspective. Judaism did not look positively at the idea of having statues or anything of that sort. But nevertheless, in regard to the Mishkan, in regard to the Aron, the Torah said that there should be two human figures. And there are two psukim that is discussed in the Medrash regarding this. One pasuk says the faces of these human figures were pneihem ish alochiv. Their faces faced each other. And the other pasuk says, that's in Yoel, upneihem ish al habayis, that on the contrary, the two human figures did not face themselves, but they had their backs facing each other, and their faces faced the wall of the Beis HaMikdash, of the temple. And the question's a very obvious question. How do we resolve the contradiction? That the faces of the keruvim face each other, or did they show each other their back and face the walls of the Mishkan? And there are two terutzim given in the Medrash, but I'm going to discuss one of them. I think it's in the name of Rabbi Yochanan. The Medrash says, "Kan osin ritzonol shamakom, kan ein osin ritzonol shamakom." When the Jewish people did the will of God, so the two human figures faced each other. But when they did not do the will of God, it was pneihem ish al habayis. They were facing the walls of the Beis HaMikdash, or the walls of the Mishkan. And it's very odd. First of all, what is the whole idea between regarding whether it's Osin Ritzon Shamakom, they do the will of God, so they face each other. What is the message behind that? And then secondly, it seems odd that the symbol of facing of Enos and Ritzono Shemokom, that they are not doing the will of God, is facing the walls of the Beis Hamikdash. Why should facing the walls of the Beis Hamikdash be understood as a symbol of Enos and Ritzono Shemokom, of not doing the will of God? Now, the Rambam in Moreh Nevuchim, he doesn't address these questions, but he offers an explanation, as do all the commentaries. This is one issue where all the commentaries and the Midrashim, they each give their own explanation as to the message of the keruvim, of these two human figures. The Rambam explains it that the prophets, when God sent them a message, the message, of course, Moshe was the exception, but the message was delivered through a malach, through an angel. And the truth of the matter is, and I think the Rambam Moreh Nevuchim points that out, that the word malach means an agent, a messenger. So to a certain degree, and we're psukim in the Torah, Hineni shalech malachi lefanecha. According to some commentaries, it has reference to Moshe Rabbeinu himself, that the word malach is not limited to an angelic figure, a heavenly figure. But the word malach could have reference to the Nevi'im, because the Nevi'im, the prophets themselves, are agents of God, are messengers of God. In fact, we find Vayishlach and Parshas Vayishlach that Yaakov sent malachim El Esav Achiv, to Esav, his brother. And there's discussion in the commentaries whether malachim mamish was angelic figures or it was just messengers, agents, because the word malach means messengers and agents. So the prophets who received their godly message through an angel, they themselves were like angels. They were agents and messengers of God. And having the malach, having the statues, if I could use the word, the keruvim, which were human figures with wings, it was to emphasize the significance and the importance, not just of the malachim, the Rambam says, but to emphasize, and primarily to emphasize, the importance of the Nevi'im, of the prophets, who they themselves were agents of God and received their message, usually through angels of God. But as I pointed out, almost every commentary has a different explanation. And I want to suggest through the duration of this year, my own explanation. There are certain things that can be explained in many, many different ways. And they could have a message, a different message for each person, a different message for each time, and a different message for each place. And there is no contradiction between these midrashim, these explanations in the midrashim. Now, last week, I discussed these are the ordinances that you shall place before them. It's the teaching of the laws, which was done by the Bezdin Hagadol, because the main task of Bezdin Hagadol was to give over the Torah Shebaal Peh. And they had to sit in the Beis Hamikdash, they had to sit near the Mizbeach, near the altar, they had to sit in the temple. Why? And I mentioned the Ramban in explaining something else. The Ramban says that the Mishkan was the vehicle of transferring the sanctity of Mount Sinai and bringing it to Jerusalem. And the sanctity of Mount Sinai was necessary because the purpose of the Beis Hamikdash, the purpose of the temple, the purpose of the Mishkan was the perpetuation of Matan Torah, of the giving of the Torah. So the Beis Hamikdash, which had the sanctity of Sinai, had to have the Sanhedrin Hagdolah, the High Court of Israel, who was in place of Moshe Rabbeinu, because our sages tell us Moshe Rabbeinu kishim v'chad koi. Moshe Rabbeinu was like the Bezdin Hagadol himself, and as I explained it last week, it wasn't just that Moshe Rabbeinu had the status of Bezdin Hagadol, but Bezdin Hagadol, in a limited perspective, had the status of Moshe Rabbeinu. They became the successors of Moshe Rabbeinu. And the perpetuation of the Sinai experience and of Sinai was to perpetuate the giving of the Torah, the luchos, the tablets, the Ten Commandments. They were in the Aron. It was to perpetuate, and also the Sefer Torah was there. And also, but the Torah Shebaal Peh, the Sanhedrin Hagdolah, the Rambam says, that's the Amud Torah Shebaal Peh. They are the pillar of the oral tradition, and they're in place of Moshe Rabbeinu. So, in a sense, the Beis Hamikdash was the perpetuation, not just of Sinai, but of the Sinai experience. And perhaps more than anything else, it was the Aron that contained the Luchos Habris, that contained the tablets of the Asaris Hadibros, of the Ten Commandments. Now it's interesting, in Parshas Yisro, when the Torah tells us about Kabbalah Torah, when the Jewish people arrived at Mount Sinai, it says, Vayichan Sham Yisrael Neged Ahor. The Jewish people camped there at the foot of the mountain, at the foot of Mount Sinai. And Medrash points out, and Rashi quotes part of the Medrash as saying that they were Ke'ish Echad B'Leiv Echad. They were like one person with one heart. And then the Medrash adds, Rashi doesn't quote that part, when HaKadosh Baruch Hu saw that they were like one person with one heart, because Vayichan Sham Yisrael is said in the singular form of Hebrew. So Rashi says, God said, let me use this opportunity to give them the Torah. So it seems that the Jewish people, being Ke'ish Echad B'Leiv Echad, being like one person with one heart, was a prerequisite of the getting of the Torah. Now, why is it that way? But the reason it's that way is because when a Jew accepts the Torah, he has to accept the Torah not just for himself, but he has to accept the Torah for all of the Jewish people. And perhaps not even just for all the Jewish people of this generation, but for all the Jewish people of all future generations. And perhaps that's what the Medrash means, that the Jewish people had to give their children, which represents the future generations, as a surety that they're accepting the Torah. Now, and this is probably the foundation of the halacha of Arvus. In a sense, when another Jew is required in the mitzvah and did not fulfill the mitzvah, and I fulfilled the mitzvah, I am still considered chayiv b'davar. I am still considered to be required in that mitzvah until the other Jew fulfills his part of that mitzvah. So let's say when I make Kiddush, I'm considered halachically to have not completely fulfilled the mitzvah of Kiddush unless I can help this other Jew. So I should be able to help another Jew fulfill the mitzvah of Kiddush. And it's very interesting. It was well known, the story with Hillel, the person who wanted to become a ger, who wanted to convert to Judaism. And he went to Shammai first. And he said, tell me the whole Torah when I'm standing on one leg. And Shammai, in a sense, did not have any involvement with him. And then he went to Hillel. And Hillel said to him, "V'yahavta l'reacha kamocha." You shall love your friend as yourself. In other words, and he says the rest of the Torah is an interpretation of the v'yahavta l'reacha kamocha. And the same thing is true about the statement of Rabbi Akiva. Rabbi Akiva said, "V'ahavta l'reacha kamocha zeh klal gadol b'Torah." This is a great principle of the Torah. And the question is, loving your friend as yourself, it's very important. And it perhaps could be the foundation of all the mitzvos bein adam lechaveiro, between man and fellow man. But there's a large part of the Torah that is the mitzvahs bein adam l'makom, mitzvahs between man and God. How could the v'ahavta l'reacha kamocha be the foundation of the whole Torah? And Rashi, to a certain degree, raises that question, and Rashi says that God has to be a reya also. God, in a sense, has to be someone who I have a relationship with also. But I want to suggest a different teretz. I want to say that v'ahavta l'reacha kamocha is the foundation of Ke'ish echad v'lev echad. If me and my friend are not like one, if it's not kamocha, then there can't be any acceptance of Torah. So the v'ahavta l'reacha kamocha represents the prerequisite for the acceptance of Torah, for the giving and acceptance of Torah. And in that sense, the v'ahavta l'reacha kamocha is the klal gadol, is the great principle of the Torah. And the rest is just interpretation, because we are telling HaKadosh, we are saying the interpretation is what we accepted for each and every one of us by virtue of us being all one. Now, it's interesting, this past Shabbos Shkolim, And in the Shabbat Shkolim, we talk, it focuses on the fact, I shouldn't say we talk, it's a drasha really. The Shabbat Shkolim, Shabbat Shkolim, we talk about the giving of the Machzis HaShekel, which was used for the Karbanos every year. Rosh Chodesh Adar, they would announce about the giving of the shkolim. Each person had to give a half a shekel. And there's the sheet of Reb Meir is that with each half shekel, a kalbon had to be given. There was a small coin of silver. And the question is, why did it have to be given? So the Mefarshim say because either as a result of the usage of the coin, part of the coin, a minute part of the coin falls off, or it becomes a little less. So to cover the missing part, you had to give a small coin of silver together with the Machzis shekel. And the Carbonata says that sometimes there was some impurity in the coin, and you needed the Machzis shekel silver. And that's the sheet of Reb Meir. Chachamim's opinion is that no, you don't have to give it under normal circumstances. So the question is, what was the reason for Reb Meir? Even though it was something that was used as a Machzis shekel, still you have to add a little, because in all likelihood, there's a problem with the coin. Either something rubbed off, or there's an impurity connected with it. And the Gemara Yerushalmi says, Ze yitnu, this you shall give. And the Medrash said, the Yerushalmi says, and this is brought in the Medrash also, that HaKadosh Baruch Hu took out a Machzis shekel, a half a shekel, mitachas kisei kvodo, under his throne, from under his throne of glory. And he can say, Kazeh yitnu, this is what you shall give. That's why Reb Meir says you have to add a little silver to it. And the question is, how do we see from there that you have to add a little silver? And the question, I think, is, in other words, there are Rishonim that say that Moshe was troubled. This was God's response. Moshe was troubled about how we can get atonement from the Machzis shekel. But we have to understand it. What is going on here? And I think, and this is, in other words, each person gave a Machzis shekel, gave a half a shekel. There were certain exceptions. It's discussed in the Yerushalmi. There were certain exceptions, but where did the kapara come? In other words, the Machzis shekel was used to buy karbanos, to buy the sacrifices and other things that were used in the Beis Hamikdash. So ultimately, when the Machzis shekel was given, the person, what was given, what it was used for, lost its connection with the individual. In other words, the Machzis shekel was, let's say, used to buy karbanos, but it was karbanos tzibur. It was the sacrifices of the community, of the nation, of the Jewish people. Once the Machzis shekel entered the treasurer's hands, the connection between the giver and was removed. And what went up to heaven, figuratively, what went up to heaven was not the matzah shekel that the individual gave, but the korban hatzibor, but the sacrifice of the community. And the kapara was an atonement for the individual. So the HaKadosh Baruch Hu took out mitachas kisei kvodo a matzis hashekel aveish. He took out a matzis hashekel that was made of fire. So many of the Mefarshim explain because fire is pure, therefore the coin had to be pure. I think it's much more than that. In other words, why is it that the matzis shekel had to be, he needed that amount of silver? Because the kapara didn't come only from the korban, didn't come only from the sacrifice. It came from the matzis hashekel itself. In a sense, the korban, the sacrifice, brought figuratively the matzis hashekel up to heaven. In fact, in Kabbalah, fire, is mimata lemala. It represents going from down upward. So it wasn't just the korban that went up. It was the matzis hashekel that also went up. In other words, the korban was used. It represented the tzibor, represented the individual, the community. But the individual, what the individual did, his part was not lost. The sum is it's equal to the sum of its parts. The whole is equal to the sum of its parts. And you need the parts there also. They all reach heaven. Since the kapara, the atonement, this is Reb Meir's opinion, since the atonement came from the matzis hashekel, not just from the korban. So when the matzis hashekel had to contain that amount of silver, it couldn't be impure. And if it did, you had to fix it somehow. And that was the kalbon. So this is the idea that sometimes we do things as part of a tzibur, as part of a community, as part of a nation. But the individual has to be still recognized. We cannot let a person be lost because of our concern for the community. And in a sense, the Beis HaMikdash itself, the building of the Beis HaMikdash, the building of the Mishkan, represents that challenge. Because the building of the Beis HaMikdash, the building of the Mishkan, of the tabernacle, that was a mitzvah on the tzibor, on the community. And the question is, when something is a project of the community, at what point, what happens to the individual? Does the individual's significance become lost or not? This was the challenge of the construction of the Beis HaMikdash and and to a certain degree, we could suggest, in a partial answer, I'm not going to conclude with it, Pnei Mishal Abayis, when they face the walls, they're only concerned about the community, unless it's Pnei Mishal Achiv. So, because what was the project of the community? The community's project was building the Beis HaMikdash, building the walls. But the purpose of the Beis HaMikdash was much more than that. And there can't be a concern for the individual. There can't be a concern for the community unless there is a concern for the individuals that make up the community. And this is a big problem that we're facing today. Leaders of Klal Yisrael, and to a large degree, many of them think that they're leaders of Klal Yisrael. They focus on Klal Yisrael. They focus on the community. That wasn't the perspective that my great-grandfather, Reb Chaim, had. Reb Chaim was concerned about the individual. I can tell you about my father, that when leaders, Torah leaders, have trouble sleeping at night because they're worried about the future of the Jewish people, my father had trouble sleeping at night because he was worried about certain individual Jews. There is a saying, it was a saying, today they don't even say it anymore. There are those who are concerned about Klal Yisrael, and there are those who are concerned about Red Yisrael. And that is the challenge that we face. Yes, we have to be concerned about Klal Yisrael, but not to the exclusion of Reb Yisrael. And I think that the keruvim on top of the Aron, or on the side of the Aron, and on the side of the Aron, they represent the idea of Keish Echad B'Leiv Echad. The idea but Keish Echad B'Leiv Echad can only begin if you see your friend. Upneihem ish alachim. The question is the Beis HaMikdash a perpetuation of the Sinai experience? Or is the Beis HaMikdash simply a temple? If the Beis HaMikdash is simply a temple, competing with other buildings architecturally, then it's Enos in Ritzono Shamakom. It's not doing, it's indicative that the Jewish people were not doing the will of God. But if it's Os in Ritzono Shamakom, if the people recognize that it's Ishalachim, and by the way, when they face each other, they're also facing the wall, just a question of which wall. So then it's Osin Richano Shalmakom, because we have to play our role. Bezdin Haggadah plays its role in making the Beis HaMikdash a perpetuation of Maimon Har Sinai. The Aron plays its role. The Mizbeach, the altar, plays its role. But we have to play our role also. And the two keruvim, they represent Klal Yisrael. And the question is, why is it that the two keruvim are Proshei Knafayim? Why do they have wings on them? Which is what led the Rambam to suggest they were angelic figures. But the answer is that what is an angel? An angel is an agent of God. An angel is an agent of God. And every Jew, the Torah in Bereshis says, "Vayivra Elokim es Adam b'tzalmo b'tzelem Elokim baro." So God created man in his image. In the image of God, he was created. That means we have to recognize that every Jew, that every person is an agent of God. Every person is put into this world with a certain mission. Every person is put into this world with a certain mission. And and we have to recognize there were those that believe that they have some special mission. No, every person has a special mission. No two people. God created man in his image. In the image of God, he was created. My father said, God created man in his image. In the image of God, he was created. That's a redundant sentence. So my father said, each person was created in their own image. Each person has his own image. And that's the image of God in him, because each person is an agent of God. My father would mention, the Rambam says that every person could be like Moshe Rabbeinu. It seems almost apikoursis. How can we say? The Rambam Hilchos Tshuva says on the basis of free will, every person could be like Moshe Rabbeinu. But the answer is that every person could be like Moshe Rabbeinu they can fulfill their mission in the same way as Moshe Rabbeinu fulfilled his mission. Years ago, now I want to just mention, just for a couple of minutes, years ago, we talk about special needs. We talk about special needs. And when we talk about special needs, we talk about individuals who have special needs. The truth of the matter is that everybody has special needs. But there are those that have more special needs than others. And those who see the community as a community as a whole, without recognizing the individuals in it, so as part of the community, so their attitude is, who are the people that will play the biggest role in the community? And because of that, they do not have the attitude of Ke'ish Echad B'Leiva. Of course, we need Talmidei Chachamim, we need great teachers and all that. But even more than that, we need people who are concerned about the needs of every individual. As a matter of fact, my father used to say that the strength of a chain is based on the strength of its weakest link. And unless we understand that, we don't understand the idea of Pnei HaMishalachim as representing the idea of Ke'ish Echad B'Leiv Echad. And years ago, I was talking with a leader of one of the group homes in New York. And he told me that he talked to one of the outstanding Balabatim in New York, a great supporter of Torah. And he asked them to donate some money for his group home. And the person says, I only give for Torah. And so he answered him, and I didn't like either one's response. He answered him, you only give for Torah. He says, when people have the special needs in their house, it takes away from their learning and from that, so you'll be giving for Torah. He did, but he failed to understand. The first answer, of course, is totally against the whole thinking of Yahadus. What do you think? How do you know whose mitzvah is accepted more in heaven? But even the response the concern, and this is a problem that we have with community organizations. Today, we have a lot of community organizations that are dedicated to special needs, but they don't see it for the needs of the person. They see it for the needs of the community. And get them out of the way. And I think I want to say about my cousin who passed away, Shifra Yehudis Orlean, that she was a very, very special person. She always had time. Not only she had time, she looked forward to talking and spending time with those who had special needs. And especially during this period, while she was sick and in the epidemic, even the day before she died, she was in the hospital. She would talk with people that had special needs just to make them feel good. She represented the idea of Ke'ish Echad B'Lev Echad, and her memory should inspire us all to follow the path that she led. Okay.
Okay, so if anyone has any questions, thank you very much. I did, as you're developing that, I did think of what your father said there about the chain is as strong as the link is link, and the way you explained in Parshas Va'era, Va'ikdu Am Va'ishtachavu.
But that's right, Rashi. But that's talking about the Ben Russia, and I'm talking about the Sheni Odei Elisho.
Yeah, but it's important to remember that everyone
that's true. Okay.
Has their message. So anyone has a question, please put it in the chat. Okay, I guess there's no questions down there. So thank you everyone for joining us.